Is an ISTP's coldness actually a calculated defense mechanism? Most people mistake their need for space as a lack of care, but it's actually a tactical preservation of independence. We're diving into why their logical brain sees long-term commitment as a threat to the sensory freedom they crave most. When people describe an ISTP in relationships, the same words appear again and again. Distant, independent, hard to read, unpredictable. Someone might say, they seem so interested at first, but then they suddenly pulled away. Another person might say, they care in their own way, but they just disappear sometimes. To the outside world, this behavior can look confusing or even emotionally cold. But inside the mind of an ISTP, there is a very precise psychological mechanism operating beneath the surface. What appears to be detachment is often the result of a deeply logical internal system trying to protect autonomy at all costs. To understand why commitment can feel threatening to an ISTP, we have to begin with their cognitive foundation. At the center of the ISTP personality sits introverted thinking, often abbreviated as T. This function acts like an internal operating system constantly analyzing how things work. Every experience, conversation, and decision is processed through a quiet analytical filter that asks one fundamental question: does this make logical sense? For most people, relationships are guided primarily by emotional connection, social expectations, or cultural norms. But the ISTP brain approaches commitment differently. Instead of immediately feeling its emotional meaning, the ISTP mind begins running an internal analysis. What are the benefits? What are the costs? What obligations will this create? What freedom might be lost? This is not cynicism. It is simply how the ISTP mind processes the world. Introverted thinking prefers systems that are efficient, flexible, and free from unnecessary constraints. The moment a situation begins to feel rigid or predetermined, the T system starts detecting potential problems. Long-term commitment, by definition, introduces structure. There are expectations, emotional responsibilities, routines, and shared decisions that must be maintained over time. For many personalities, this structure creates safety. For the ISTP mind, however, structure can sometimes register as limitation. Imagine an engineer examining a machine before agreeing to operate it for the rest of their life. They do not simply jump in and start using it. They examine the parts, study the potential failure points, and calculate whether the long-term maintenance cost is worth the output. That is how the ISTP mind often approaches commitment. Their brain begins evaluating the long-term mechanics of the relationship. Will this person respect my independence? Will this arrangement allow me to maintain my lifestyle? Will emotional expectations interfere with my ability to think clearly and act freely? This process happens quietly, often without the other person realizing it. On the outside, the ISTP may appear calm, curious, and even affectionate. But internally, their mind is conducting a continuous cost-benefit analysis. And this analysis is where many commitment struggles begin. From the perspective of introverted thinking, commitment can look like a high-risk investment. The potential rewards may include companionship, loyalty, and emotional support. But the potential costs may include loss of autonomy, increased emotional responsibility, and the possibility of being trapped in a situation that becomes inefficient or emotionally draining. Because ISTPs are naturally skeptical of systems they cannot control, their mind tends to highlight these risks early. This does not mean they reject relationships entirely. In fact, many ISTPs enjoy companionship, physical closeness, and shared experiences. Their secondary cognitive function, extroverted sensing, thrives on real-world interaction and adventure. ISTPs often enjoy spontaneous dates, travel, hobbies, and hands-on activities with a partner. In the early stages of a relationship, this can make them appear exciting and engaged. They live in the moment and enjoy the sensory richness of shared experiences. But the moment a relationship begins shifting from spontaneous connection to structured commitment, the psychological tension begins to grow. Suddenly the ISTP mind begins noticing new expectations. Conversations about the future. Discussions about emotional needs. Plans that require long-term stability. What once felt like freedom now begins to resemble obligation. At this point, the ISTP's internal operating system starts raising quiet alarms. Not dramatic emotional alarms, but logical ones. Questions appear. What if this limits my freedom? What if I become responsible for someone else's emotional stability? What if the relationship becomes inefficient or suffocating? Because ISTPs process these concerns internally rather than emotionally, they often do not express them openly. Instead, the response appears as subtle withdrawal. They may become quieter, less communicative, slightly more distant. To the partner, this shift can feel confusing. The relationship seemed strong yesterday, but today something feels different. The truth is that the ISTP mind has simply entered analysis mode. This is where the psychological barrier against emotional vulnerability begins forming. Emotional vulnerability requires something that introverted thinking finds difficult: surrendering control to unpredictable feelings. When someone opens their heart, they accept uncertainty. They accept that emotions can influence decisions, create obligations, and sometimes override logic. For the ISTP mind, this lack of control can feel destabilizing. So instead of diving deeper emotionally, the ISTP brain often builds distance as a protective measure. It is not necessarily a conscious decision. It is more like an automatic system response designed to preserve internal balance. If emotional expectations start increasing too quickly, the ISTP instinctively creates space to restore autonomy. This is why many partners experience the ISTP as emotionally elusive. They may show affection through actions rather than words. They may fix your car, build something for you, or help solve practical problems in your life. These gestures are often their way of expressing care. In the ISTP mind, actions are more reliable than emotional declarations. Words can be exaggerated or misleading, but a practical action demonstrates real commitment in a tangible way. However, because their emotional language is expressed through problem-solving rather than emotional discussion, misunderstandings frequently occur. A partner may want reassurance, verbal affection, or deep emotional conversations. The ISTP may interpret these requests as unnecessary emotional complexity. From their perspective, the relationship already works. They show up. They help. They spend time together. Why add additional emotional expectations that complicate an otherwise functional system? This difference in communication styles can create tension over time. The partner may begin pushing for deeper emotional openness. The ISTP may begin feeling pressured to perform emotional behaviors that do not come naturally. The more pressure they feel, the stronger their instinct to retreat becomes. At this point, many people interpret the ISTP's behavior as emotional coldness. But what is actually happening is a defensive recalibration. The ISTP mind is attempting to protect its core value, independence. Autonomy is not simply a preference for ISTPs. It is a psychological requirement for mental stability. When they feel trapped or controlled, their internal system begins to malfunction. Stress increases. Irritability rises. And the relationship itself may start to feel like a threat to their identity. Interestingly, this autonomy instinct often develops early in life. Many ISTPs learn through experience that independence gives them the most control over their environment. They become comfortable solving problems alone, navigating challenges without relying heavily on others. Over time, this self-sufficiency becomes a defining part of their personality. So when commitment introduces emotional interdependence, it can feel unfamiliar and even risky. Interdependence requires trust. It requires allowing another person to influence your decisions, routines, and emotional world. For someone whose psychological stability depends on independence, that adjustment can feel uncomfortable. Yet this does not mean ISTPs cannot form deep, loyal relationships. In fact, when they do commit, they often become incredibly steady partners. The key difference is that their commitment process is slower and more cautious. They need time to analyze the relationship thoroughly before lowering their psychological defenses. During this period, they are quietly observing. They are watching how the other person handles conflict. They are evaluating whether the partner respects their need for space. They are noticing whether emotional expectations remain reasonable or begin expanding uncontrollably. If the relationship passes these internal tests, the ISTP gradually relaxes. Trust begins forming not through emotional promises, but through consistent behavior over time. Reliability matters more than romantic declarations. Stability matters more than emotional intensity. But if the relationship triggers too many internal alarms, the ISTP may decide that the investment is too risky. Because they prioritize logical efficiency, they often prefer exiting early rather than staying in a situation that appears unsustainable. To the partner, this exit can feel sudden or even shocking. But from the ISTP's perspective, the analysis has been happening quietly for a long time. Understanding this dynamic reveals something important about ISTPs. Their struggle with commitment is rarely about a lack of feeling. Instead, it is about protecting the internal system that keeps them mentally balanced. They care deeply about maintaining autonomy because it allows them to function at their best. When partners recognize this, the relationship dynamic changes dramatically. Instead of interpreting the ISTP's need for space as rejection, it can be understood as psychological maintenance. Just as some people need emotional reassurance, ISTPs need independence to stay emotionally regulated. Healthy relationships with ISTPs often develop when both partners respect this balance. The ISTP must learn that vulnerability does not automatically erase independence. Meanwhile, the partner must learn that closeness does not require constant emotional intensity. In the end, the detached heart of an ISTP is not empty. It is simply engineered differently. Beneath the calm exterior is a mind constantly analyzing how to maintain freedom, stability, and logical balance. Commitment is not rejected because it lacks value, but because the ISTP brain must be absolutely certain the system will work. And once that certainty is achieved, something interesting happens. The very same analytical mind that once resisted commitment begins protecting it with remarkable loyalty. Because when an ISTP decides a relationship passes their internal logic test, it becomes part of their system. And once something becomes part of the system, they rarely abandon it without a very good reason.